was a jackhammer against the marble floor when we discovered our futures were not the same color. 10 years of mixing paint, we were linseed seeped collages, rendered speechless. I found myself glass dipped. Oh, I just stared up at the supermoon, hoping it had a mouth or to swallow me down like I was a citizen, and I could just float away in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon. No, they didn't really wanna let me back in, but maybe 'cause the moon was gargantuan. The doorman said he'd try to find you through the mass of people in masks filtering in and out of rooms.
Thank you for joining. We're going to give it a few more minutes before we go ahead and get started.
I just stared up at the supermoon, hoping it had a mouth that would swallow me down like I was a citizen, and I could just float away in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon. Oh, I just stared up at the supermoon, hoping it had a mouth that would swallow me down like I was a citizen, and I could just float away in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon, in the brain of the moon.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're going to go ahead and give it a few more minutes before we get started.
It was real. There you were, and I didn't question till the moment you disappeared. I don't know what it means, always seeing you around. But what I know is, what I know is, I love how you linger in my life. I love finding traces of you. What a sweet surprise. Don't fade away. Like ink you stay, and you remain. Thought that I'd be over you by now. But my eyes lead me to believe you appear when you're not around. Stay by my side.
Thank you for joining us, everyone. We're going to give it a few more minutes before we get started.
But you got me at a home. Cracks that I've left open and you somehow take control. How did you know that I'd be waiting for you? But it was just my imagination that pulled me back to loving you. These thoughts, they're in rotation, and I can't get away from you. But it was just my imagination that pulled me back to loving you. These thoughts, they're in rotation, and I can't get away from you.
Thank you for joining, everyone. Just a few housekeeping tips while we're waiting. I want to make sure that we all know who we are and where we're coming from. So if everyone wants to go ahead and add their name, add your name to your box, and then also add a statement after your name as far as which organization or which group or which college you're with, so we know who's joining us from the college. We'll get started momentarily.
What did I expect? I loved you and you tainted me. Yeah, you tainted me. You are it. You saved me from within. And how I wonder if I seep into your soul. But it was just my imagination that pulled me back to loving you. These thoughts, they're in rotation.
Hello, everyone. Before we formally get started, I'm going to give a few housekeeping tips. It's so nice to see so many of you and so many faces in little squares. If you want to see everyone, please use the arrow on the right side of your screen to scroll through your pages. Everyone can wave if they want to. Hello. I'm going to ask that you rename yourself. If you will look in your photo square where your name is at the bottom of your square, click on the 3 little dots in the right-hand corner of your photo square. The third option down will be rename, and we ask that you type in your first and last name as well as your major. In addition, I'm asking that you please utilize the chat box and let us know why you've joined us today. What are you hoping to get out of this career fair prep event? We want to know who's with us and what you plan to learn. During this hour, we are hosting 2 20-minute quick topic sessions. We will also have a Q&A during each speaker segment. So if you will wait for each speaker to finish, we will have time to call on you for a Q&A. Those with questions, please either raise your hand. This feature can be found by clicking on the participant, and then under your name, you will see a raise your hand option. It should be blue. Our team will call on you and unmute you to hear your question. Please note that when you are unmuted, you will receive a pop-up that you will need to accept before you are able to speak. Or you can use the chat feature as stated before and ask your questions, and we will answer them during the Q&A section. So let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to introduce myself and my fellow MC, Fabian Laguna. My name is Natrice Bryant. I am the Deputy Executive Director for the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, as well as a member of the CU Alumni Board. It's so nice to see everyone. Fabian, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sorry, my name is Fabian Laguna. I'm the Vice President of the Student Government Association, and I'm a master's student studying international business. I'm entering my second year, so I'm really excited to introduce these speakers today. I think they're really gonna bring some relevant topics, and I'm excited for y'all's questions as well.
Thank you, Fabian. We're so excited to have you all here today. We're excited to bring these two presentations to you from two former CU Denver alumni, keynote speakers, who will discuss topics surrounding Colorado's current environment, landscape, as well as tips to getting a job in a virtual interview environment. I remember when I graduated from CU in 2002, the environment looked very different, so I'm so excited to be with you all to discuss some of the options that you have. That was a long time ago, but we're here today to talk about what a virtual environment looks like. First, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Cindy DeGroen. She is the Senior Demographer at the Colorado State Demography Office. It's the primary state agency for population and demographic information. In addition, the office represents the state and local needs and concerns relating to conduct of the decennial census. That's Census 2020. Make sure you guys fill out your census. She has over 25 years of experience analyzing economic and demographic trends for the United States and Colorado, and has graduated from the University of Colorado, Denver with a degree in mathematics. Cindy, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Natrice. I'm really happy to be here today. I appreciate you having me. And this afternoon, I get to talk about the population and economic trends in Colorado. As many of us know, the link between the population and the economy is the labor market. And so by understanding these trends and by understanding what's happened with these trends since the start of the pandemic, we can get a better picture of the current state of the labor market. So on the next slide, I thought I would begin by talking about where we were. What were the things that I was talking about in Colorado prior to the pandemic? And the number one was that population is growing at a slowing rate. So certainly when we look at the United States, this has been the slowest growing decade since the 1930s. Reaching about 330 million people. Colorado's about 1.7% of that total, and so we were just under 5.8 million. But last year was our slowest growth since 2005. And so many of you who maybe live, work, or go to school in downtown Denver certainly hasn't felt like it's been slowing, and the reason for that is because of the concentrated growth we've experienced. This is new and unique for Colorado in that 95% of all the growth to the state has located along the Front Range this decade. And that's as compared to about 80% historically. But to understand growth in Colorado, certainly migration's a piece of it. And migration to Colorado is strongly related to job growth. So one important thing to know is as we grow jobs, we grow people. At the end of last year, labor was tight. So Colorado reached record lows in terms of our unemployment rates several times in 2019. And we're all aware of the fact that the cost of housing has been increasing also. And then also aging. So those baby boomers that we've all heard about, born 1946 to 1964, the first of whom turned 65 just after 2010. Their aging has impacted everything in the state. Just our changing age distribution, including the economy, education, housing, transportation, public finance. And then also we're experiencing increasing racial and ethnic diversity. So diversity in Colorado is young. When we look over the last 5 years at the entrance to the labor force, 7 out of every 10 has been Hispanic. And so just as this much younger, more diverse population ages, Colorado is going to become much more diverse. So on the next slide, I think it's helpful to understand where we are, to take a step back and look at the past. And this chart shows Colorado's population growth from 1970 to 2019. Each one of those bars represents the growth Colorado received over a one-year period, and the bars are color-coded. So the red part of the bar represents net migration, and the blue part of the bar represents what we call natural increase, or those are births minus deaths. And a couple things to note. So we had some strong growth decades that drove migration. And in particular, when the baby boomers were young, in 1970, we were growing significantly. And if you were here in the 90s, this was the growth that was never going to end until it did. And it ended in the early 2000s. But as we look more recently, net migration's been about half of our growth. The thing to note about the blue part of the bar is that in 2019, we saw just about the same number of natural increases we did back in 1970, when our population was about a third of the size. And so that's being caused by the fact that we have this changing age distribution. And so having a larger share of our population in older age groups, which are subject to higher mortality. So we're seeing increasing deaths as well as declining births due to a smaller share of the population in childbearing ages, as well as some of the declines that we've seen in fertility for our young mothers. And so that is really what's behind slowing the growth nationally and for Colorado as well. And then on the next slide, this is a map of our population growth. So as I mentioned, 95% of all growth happening along the Front Range. And you can see those counties in the Front Range all highlighted red in terms of getting the largest population growth. Those counties that followed are in orange, and then the shades of yellow, all growing, having larger number of persons in 2019 than in 2010, but about a third of our counties on this map in blue having actually population decline. And so having fewer residents in 2019 than they had in 2010. And this is quite consistent with the nation, as we saw about a third of the nation's counties also experience population decline. And we'll take a look at the next slide. And this is why, right? Where have our jobs been growing? They've been growing along the Front Range as well. And so this map shows the 2019 jobs relative to our pre-Great Recession peak. And so those red counties all having at least 20% more jobs than they had at the end of the Great Recession. And that same is true, having more jobs for the counties in orange and all the shades of yellow. However, for all the counties on this map that are blue or that light gray, having fewer jobs today than they had at the start of the Great Recession. And the next slide. But when we talk about those jobs, what are those jobs? What are the jobs that we've grown? Number one, health services. And this makes sense when we think about that aging population. So when our fastest growing age group is 65 and over, they're big consumers of healthcare. And then followed by professional and technical services, accommodation and food, transportation and warehousing, state government and local government round out those top fastest or largest growing ones. But this chart's also color coded. So in Colorado, 20% of our job growth was in high wage categories. And we can see that by those on the chart that are colored green, including the professional and technical services, management of companies, finance activities, and some of the wholesale trade jobs. The majority, almost half, mid-wage jobs, and those include the health services, transportation and warehousing, state and local government. And then 33% of our job growth was in the low wage, accommodation and food services, administration and waste, arts, entertainment, and recreation, which we know what's happened to some of those jobs since the start of the pandemic. So if we go to the next slide, this chart shows that job loss that Colorado experienced from January to April, just as some of the shutdowns went into effect. So we lost 342,000 jobs during that time period, the majority of which were in accommodation and food services, followed by healthcare and social assistance, and then the arts, entertainment, and recreation. But since that time, since April, we've gained back more than half those jobs. This one is April through June in the orange, and we can see that increase of 126,000 jobs. And if we think about, so the US data was just released last week, and they are about halfway back. And we're doing slightly better than the US as a whole. And so we're a little better than halfway back to that end. But the next slide. So what are the overall impacts from the coronavirus? Certainly the number one question I got asked at the start of the pandemic is, are we going to have a baby boom? because apparently everybody was wondering what other folks who were under stay-home orders were going to be doing while they were staying home. My answer to that is certainly not likely. Typically during a recession, we see births decline. We also have never seen a boom following any other type of natural disaster or the Spanish flu, where we've had some stay-at-home orders. And then those deaths will be continuing to increase as well. We expect those to continue going higher. So those baby boomers, the first of whom turned 75 this year. And so definitely continued increase in those deaths, and then as well as the deaths from the coronavirus. So if we go from July of 2019 to July of 2020, we experienced about 4,000 more deaths than we were anticipating seeing. The big question, though, that migration. We expect to continue to see in-migration from traditional donor states, including California and New York, which New York is actually our biggest net migrant. We have a lot of New Yorkers who move to Colorado and not many Coloradans who decide to relocate to New York. And then we'll continue to see out-migration from Colorado to some lower cost states as well. And certainly teleworking, a big question. 35% of the state's workforce is continuing to telework. And what impact might that have on rural Colorado when you don't have to locate quite as close to your job as in the past if you're teleworking? And then that aging is still going to happen, and increasing racial and ethnic diversity will still happen also. So on the next slide, I have my contact information in the event you want to reach out with any additional questions. I know we have time for some questions now, though, also.
Thank you so much, Cindy. At this point in time, everyone, we will turn it over to questions. Again, if you do have a question, you're able to raise your hand in the participant feature, and you can click on the 3 little dots in the bottom corner that will ask you to either raise your hand, or you can start chatting your information or your question in the chat box. As we're waiting for people to start asking questions, Cindy, I have a question I'd like to ask to kick off the session. In a market that we find to be mostly virtual, you talked about the percentages. If we're interested in getting into one of those industries that you talked about with large growth, what would be your recommendation to all of the individuals on the call today on what best practices you have to get into a market such as healthcare, local government, or state government when we're in such a virtual environment?
Right, well, certainly in any environment, virtual or other, it's going to be to focus on those skills. There are an awful lot of skills. You may have had your mindset on one particular industry that might not be one of the faster growing industries. And so by having your skill set available, a lot of those skills are transferable to some of those other industries. So you might not have thought about healthcare in the past, but you might want to start thinking about it. And a lot of those skills that you've gained studying other things can move right over. The other thing is that there are a lot of us, myself included, who are home working, and certainly reaching out is a great thing. And I think we're all excited when we hear from someone who just wants to know maybe how our jobs have changed since the start of the pandemic, or what it's like continuing to work in virtual. And then the other piece that I think I've really appreciated, I'm the hiring manager within the state demography office. And one of the things that's impressed me most by folks is this easy communication. We love to learn about your research, but to the extent that research can be summarized in sort of a one visual display for those main findings, that can be incredibly impressive as well.
Thank you, Cindy. That's a lot of great information. Once again, if you do have a question, you're able to raise your hand, or you can chat your question in the chat box. We'll give it a couple of minutes before questions.
I'm just going to quickly ask you something. First of all, thank you so much, Cindy. That it's so interesting to see all of that data, you know, coming from an expert. But I'm just curious if you could just speak a little bit more to what the sort of kind of demographics are going to look like moving into the next 5-10 years. You're saying like the population is changing a lot in terms of like diversity, and I'm curious, you know, what are the figures that they're predicting? You know, what is our state going to be made up of?
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much for your question. And certainly when we look forward, one of the things we talk about are population totals, of course, so that growth continuing, we're going to continue to grow, but that growth continuing to slow as well. And then in terms of the age distribution, We are aging rapidly. We're the second fast aging state in the nation. And that's mainly because we were one of the youngest. And so we were fourth youngest in the nation in 2010. We're not anymore after being the second fastest aging in the state. And our fastest growing age group is actually that 75 plus age group. Although we'll continue to see strong growth. Most of our migrants are certainly between the ages of 18 and 35. So that's our age distribution. So totals continuing, certainly we had focused most of that growth along the Front Range, but I think we're starting to move that out a little bit, potentially due to the pandemic. And then when we talk about race and ethnicity within the state, and within the nation as well. So diversity is much younger. And so we're 32% of our population is Hispanic, Black, Asian, American Indian, or other. And that's we're slightly less diverse than the nation as a whole, but when we look strictly at our youth population, we're more diverse than the nation is as a whole. So we're gonna start to see some significant increases. As I mentioned, 7 out of every 10 of those entering that workforce age group, so 16 plus, have been Hispanic within the state. And so just becoming much more diverse as we age. Right now, more than 50% of our population in our under 5 age group is Hispanic, Black, Asian, American Indian, or other. And so as they age, that will continue to progress. When we look at that 65 plus population, though, they're nearly 85% is white non-Hispanic. And so those shifts will be happening rapidly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's very insightful. I appreciate that. We do have a question from Alexander asking if, so you mentioned the work from home potentially opening up in rural Colorado or growth in rural Colorado. What do you know about rural internet infrastructure? And do you know anything, are we there yet? And what's it gonna take to, establish that?
That's a great question, and I can see Natrice smiling as well. The Colorado Department of Local Affairs, which is where Natrice is my boss, by the way. So where we work, we do have several broadband initiatives and are trying to push broadband out to more, or trying to assist in that development of broadband out throughout the rest of the state. And there are several areas within Colorado that have excellent broadband, but we're not completely there yet. I'd be curious if Natrice wants to add anything.
Sure, Cindy, I'm happy to add some things. I was smiling because I thought this is an opportunity for us to talk about rural broadband infrastructure. So the Department of Local Affairs, for everyone's information, we actually have a incentive program that we've been working with rural local governments, so pretty much all of the counties outside of the Front Range, because we recognize that that middle mile component is still lacking in a lot of our communities. So we've got $5 million per year that we set aside to ensure that those rural communities are able to gain the access to infrastructure that they need. If this pandemic has shown us anything, it has definitely shown us that there is a gap outside of the Front Range, and I'm sure all of us have experienced some sort of internet connectivity issues during our work from home phase, where we either hang up on a Zoom call or our system freezes because all of our kids are on the internet trying to do school and we're working. And so recognizing that component has definitely been part of our goal and our effort. And so yes, I would say we're there, but we're not completely there. So we have, I'll chat a website that you guys can go and refer to that has all of our infrastructure plans that we've been working with rural Colorado to show you where we are seeing gaps and how we're going to be addressing those in the next 5 years. Do we have any additional questions? I don't see any hands raised. Please feel free to chat your questions in the box. Thanks, Alexander.
And
that was a great question too.
Yeah, I'll wait for people to ask a little, or if no one's gonna ask, I'll just quickly be selfish and ask another question. I'm just curious, Cindy or Natrice, if how you know of like companies preparing for this changing workforce. Like how are companies preparing for these new types of applicants that are, like if traditionally they've had white applicants, how are they doing anything to prepare for recruiting, people from different backgrounds?
Yes, I appreciate that question, and I think it's a very thoughtful question, and it's a lot of outreach that our office has been doing these past few years have been going to different businesses and presenting what the statistics are, because certainly what most businesses want are the best and the brightest, right, in terms of everyone, and want to make sure that they're appealing to everyone to apply to as well. And so I know a lot of the strategies that I've heard companies are starting to employ are making sure they're looking around their leadership, number one, and saying, what does our leadership look like? Can we be mentors? Do we have mentors within 4 different types of different race and ethnic categories? What does our company look like? And so wanting to make sure that they reflect the type of groups that they would like to attract in terms of that workforce coming in. And then just recognizing, working on different diversity plans and making sure they have a culture that's inclusive and ready to accept all different types of race and ethnic groups into those companies.
Thank you so much, Cindy, for that insight. Everyone, we're going to take a moment and thank Cindy. We can clap for her virtually, or we can do our hands, whatever you'd like. Thank you so much, Cindy, for your presentation. We're going to be transitioning shortly into our next presentation. Our next speaker is Jennifer Fairweather, and she will talk about the value that you can add to your resume as well as interviewing in the virtual world. So we'll take a break, and then Fabian will kick us off in a moment.
Yeah, make sure to come back, everyone. Jennifer has some really great tips for applying to jobs right now, and I think it'll make everyone feel a lot more confident. So please stick around.
I know no one's listening, but I gotta get a little something off my chest. Off my chest. I'm sick of seeing turning heads. There's nothing close to normal about this. About this. We've seen it time and time again. Presidents and congressmen. Not this time. We said not this time. But here we are beside ourselves. Oh man, ain't that something else? No one drew the line. No one drew the line. So I just wanna say fuck you in a million different ways. 'Cause no one ever learns from trial and error these days. You kinda sleep in the beds that you made. 'Cause no one ever learns from trial and error these days. I first met you in old days. Memories are here, but it's a haze. Choices were wrong, but I see now. I was the one blind. Can I show how? I can see your face in mine. I can no longer waste time. You turn back and I almost wanna cry. Be alright if you be alright. It's been 5 years now on myself. I feel like a book on high shelf. Read the story, no return. I'll read yours it burn. I can see your face in mine. I can no longer waste time. You turn back and I almost wanna cry. I can see your face in mine. I can no longer waste time. You turn back and I almost wanna cry. Almost wanna cry. Be alright if you be alright. Be alright. Be alright. Be alright.
All right, everyone. Welcome back. Hope you had a nice break. Got to stretch out a little bit. That diversity expo, that diversity in academia expo looks so cool. I just saw that, so keep that in my head. But yeah, welcome back, everyone. I am very honored and happy to introduce Jennifer Fairweather to all of you. She's going to be our next speaker. She also is an alum of the university, an alumni, and you know, I'm very proud to be, you know, in both of these alumni's company today. It's really inspiring to see them, you know, experts in their field speak to us and, you know, spend some time with us. So I appreciate that. But anyways, Jennifer is the director of human resources for Jefferson County. Jefferson County is in Golden, Colorado. She's also an affiliate professor with Regis University, so she facilitates undergraduate and graduate courses there for the College of Business and Economics. She has over 23 years of experience in public sector and private sector human resources and operational management experience. So she is definitely a great resource for all of us. She received a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Administration from CU Denver, from the same school that I'm at right now, and a Master's of Arts in Human Resources Development from Webster University. She's facilitated sessions on leadership and development for local and national forums, and she's written articles for newsletters and newspapers on various management and human resources topics. She's a Colorado native, and she enjoys gardening, cooking, traveling, and spending time with her family, especially the pets too. So everyone give a warm welcome to Jennifer. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you so much for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. So if we go to the next slide, just real quick, what I'm going to talk about in our short time together is kind of how COVID-19 has impacted the job market from an HR perspective. Some key skills that are really important for virtual employment. Even here in Jefferson County, Colorado, a lot of our employees are still working from home most of the time. So just some critical elements to keep in mind, and how to elevate your resume to make sure that you're noticed, and just some tips for what I'm seeing that make virtual interviews a lot more successful when you're doing them over Zoom and things like that versus an in-person interview. So the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about some of the COVID-19 impacts on the job market from the human resources side. I mean, we've heard a lot about the demographics, and this is really relatable. According to Monster.com, and Monster is kind of one of those job boards we use in HR to advertise jobs, what we saw there is that healthcare and work from home roles dominated searches in the spring, but more and more business related roles are coming into that search. So Monster reports that candidates are seeking more business operation positions now than healthcare roles. Things like administrative jobs, accounting, HR, IT, receptionists, all outranked healthcare positions and nursing job searches. And similarly, businesses are starting to post more job openings in the financial and business operations, as well as manager positions. Now, you also might notice in your job search, you may see more jobs that are labeled as temporary or limited or internships, and you might be thinking that's not my long-term goal. But as we all know in the job search, networking is critical. And so sometimes taking a temporary job or an internship, although that's not your, what you're hoping to achieve in the long term, it does allow you the opportunity to network with maybe that person who will have a potential full-time role for you. Everyone knows that when you're able to prove yourself with someone and they have a future opening or can be a great person to market you to other hiring managers, that is such an effective way to elevate yourself as a potential candidate for a position. So in the next slide, when we talk about key skills in the virtual environment, when we're hiring people who are going to be working from home right now, either full-time or part-time, at least here in Jefferson County, and for my colleagues, some things are always important, like relationship skills. That's never not important, but we're always looking for people in all of our roles that can build good relationships with their coworkers, as well as anyone they're serving as far as customers or clients or people in the community. So being able to collaborate, being able to build trust with other people, those are always critical. Now, of course, communication skills is incredibly important, being able to verbally communicate and being able to write. When you're working from home, sometimes you have to rely more a bit on the writing skills if you're having an uptick in emails and things like that. So that clarity and being able to communicate well is absolutely critical. We're looking for people who are resilient. It's stressful times right now for everybody. You never know what's going to happen day to day. People may be concerned about, their kids or their family members, their health, and having that resiliency to still be able to, come to work and show up and give, your 110% to your job and serve people is something we always need, as well as people who are dependable and consistent. For a lot of managers in the workplace, having their team at home is really new for them. And they're still a little bit uncomfortable. Some of them may still be wondering, are you at home, watching Netflix, or are you actually focusing on your responsibilities? So we're always wanting to make sure that we hire people who are dependable and are consistent and will always show up day after day to get the work done. Being flexible and adaptable is critical right now. Things change day to day. One day you might be in the office, the next day things could close up and you're working from home. One day you're in a Zoom meeting, the next hour you're in a WebEx meeting, and tomorrow you're on a Teams meeting. So people need to be flexible and willing to go with the flow and adapt to the changing environment, because it's changing a lot more rapidly right now than what a lot of people are used to. And of course, as I just mentioned, there's a lot of technology. So being tech savvy is just having a heads up and being able to figure things out on your own, trial and error, and not getting upset when technology fails you, because it always it has that opportunity to sometimes give us the blues on any given day, right? So on the next slide, I want to talk about ways to make your resume stand out. As we heard about earlier, it's no longer an employee's market. Now we have more job applicants than we have jobs. And so, whereas before when we would post a job, especially in some of our hard to fill areas like IT, we might get 10 qualified applicants. Now I just posted a job for a diversity, equity, inclusivity manager for the county. I have over 100 applicants. So things are really shifting. So how do you make your resume stand out so that a recruiter will see it? You have to remember that people who work in talent acquisition or recruiting, they may be looking at 100, 200, 300 resumes in a day. So what is it that's going to make them pick yours up and look at it a little bit closer? One, is it visually appealing? Of course you want it to look nice. You don't want typos. You want certain things to stand out. You don't want to use the same font. You want to use different fonts, and sometimes a little color is appropriate. Sometimes a little bold, a bigger font. Those kinds of things make it stand out. You want to make sure it's relevant. Your resume should always be tailored to the job that you're applying for. You should never use the same resume for every job or every organization you're applying to. You always want to go in and tweak it and make sure the things that are relevant for the position are going to stand out. And so it's personalized for that specific jobs. You want to focus on what you accomplished and not what you did in a job. Recruiters anymore don't want to hear what your job responsibilities are. They want to hear what you actually accomplished, how you helped your organization achieve its mission. Do you have any quantitative statistics that you can share in things that you achieved? Did you increase sales? Did you reduce error rates? Did you complete so many audits? What are the things that you accomplished in your role, not just what your role is about, because that's basically a job description and doesn't say anything about you. Make sure your resume is appropriate in length. Again, when I said people might be reviewing hundreds of resumes, no one wants to review anything that's 4 pages. People generally look at that first page and will decide if they're going to keep going and delve in more, or put it in the other pile of maybe I'll look at it later. And always just focus on that relevant information. On the next slide, I have, kind of a before and after. So you can see the difference. The content is the same for each of those, but between those, if you saw these both come on your desk, which one might you pick up first? I'd probably pick up the one on the right first. The name is big. I see a little color. It looks interesting. I might pick up that one and read it a little closer. Remember, it's more of an employer's market now. So whatever you can do, you need to stand out. But with that being said, with the resume, I don't want you to forget about the job application. If you go to the next slide, I want you to keep in mind that you should never underestimate an application. You may see a job posted on LinkedIn and it says apply here, but if you look closely, it says click this website to apply. You have to remember that many organizations, especially large organizations, use applicant tracking systems. They don't just look at your resume. There is a software that will collect your application, and your resume may be included in that. And that software may also screen you out. The software may be looking for how you answered certain questions. Are you bilingual? Do you have 5 years of experience? Do you know how to use Excel? What's your, how would you rate your expertise in Excel? Expert, beginner, etc. And the system, the software screens people out based on what they're looking for. What I see is that sometimes people put all their effort into the resume and they don't answer the questions well in the application. They don't even complete the application. They'll say, see resume. They don't answer the questions thoroughly. There may be essay questions asking you to expand upon your experience. And the system is screening you out and the recruiter is not even seeing your resume. So when you encounter a company, and it's going to be your larger organizations generally that have these systems, don't feel like, oh, my resume will speak for itself, because a lot of times you've got a software system doing the work for the recruiter in the form of this application that is meant to screen down candidates and get to people who are qualified and or have the most qualifications. So putting as much effort into that application is also another way to make sure that you get noticed and can get to the interview where you can really shine. So let's now talk about the interview. A lot of organizations, including mine, are doing a lot of interviews virtually. You know, I have to tell you that more employers are turning to the virtual interview to evaluate job applicants. But unfortunately, there's a lot of research that shows a face-to-face interview is more effective for the panel to get to know the candidate and for the candidate to get to know the panel. But however, this is the world we live in right now, so there's nothing we can do about it, right? So we just have to make the best of it. So let's unpack some things we need to know. The next slide, I've listed the good things about a virtual interview. They're convenient. You're at home, you're comfortable. There's no travel time. So you can take away that stress you have when going to an interview, you know, where you're looking for a building or you're trying to find parking or there's an accident and you think you're going to be late. All that's gone. That's great. You can apply for more opportunities in more places. You don't have to travel across the country or drive across the state to interview. And you can even hide your mannerisms. You know, right now under the table, I could be doing all kinds of fidgeting under my desk and you don't know it. So that can be the good. Now let's look at the bad. Of course, there can be technology issues. There can be challenges with eye contact and body language. It may be harder to build rapport. And you might not be able to show your charisma with the panel as much as you might in an in-person interview. So George Washington University researchers, they analyzed 12 studies on technology and job interviews, and they believe that the absence of body language, eye contact, and rapport building and video interviews can actually hurt a person's chance of landing the job. There are things like awkward camera angles or a lag time or video freezes or when the sound goes off that can lead to miscommunication in how people are asking a question or answering a question. And unfortunately, that technology might reflect poorly on the candidate, even though it has nothing to do with that candidate's ability. So there are some bad things and some challenges. Let's not even call them bad things, but some challenges. And so when you think about it, next slide. What could possibly go wrong? Well, you go to your interview and this happens. You can't connect to the interview. What are you going to do? You know, it happens to everyone, and I've seen it happen in panels I've been on, and resourceful candidates are prepared. They've got backup phone numbers for people on the panel, and we've had someone call and say, I can't get in. Can you Skype with me? Can I do a FaceTime? How can I still connect with this panel? And they moved on to the next interview because we realized, okay, technology glitches happen, but they made the effort and they were resourceful, they were calm under pressure, they were resilient. So they were showing all those qualities that we need in our employees just in handling the technology issues they were facing. So the next slide, what are some differences to be aware of with virtual interviews? Again, as I said, sometimes the camera angle is awkward. There can be lag time. Your video might freeze. You could get disconnected. You sometimes can't see the full interview panel because of the tool that they're using. You might have audio difficulties, and sometimes you have to learn a new platform. You have an interview in Zoom today, and tomorrow they're asking you to come through Teams, and you're like, I don't even know what Teams is. So how are we going to mitigate those issues? On the next slide, just some key tips for you. Test your technology beforehand. You know, if possible, even sign into the platform well in advance of your interview. Check your Wi-Fi, check your connections, all of those things to see if you're prepared as much as you can be. Of course, as always, dress appropriately, in person versus virtual. Everything should look professional. Again, I can't say enough about that. Sometimes we see people a little casual on their virtual interviews. Even though you're at home, might feel weird. Go ahead and dress for the job that you want. Check your surroundings. And I always tell people to check what their camera looks like before the interview. Even though you may look behind you and think everything looks good, sometimes we're seeing people get on an interview and their seat's so low that we're only seeing like this part of them or this part of them, and it's really awkward. And you don't want the panel to be distracted by staring at things like that. So just check that as well. Ensure that you have a quiet space and a good space behind you. So, you know, a blank wall or just an appropriate picture, that you're going to be in an area of your home or your office where you're not going to have interruptions and dogs or people, you know, people walking by behind you. All those things create distractions. Your phone is off, your cell phone's off, no buzzing, you know, all of those things. Make sure you're ready for that. Prepare as you would for an interview. You know, run through test questions, even set up a personal Zoom with you and someone else who's willing to ask you some tough questions and see how you're coming across. Make sure that, you know, you are prepared and feel confident, because that's going to come through on your interview, even virtually. And avoid virtual backgrounds if possible in your interview. Again, what I've been seeing on some panels is people use the virtual backgrounds, but as you know, sometimes like your head can disappear in a virtual background, or your hands disappear, and that again becomes a distraction to the panel. So they're not hearing what you're saying. They're focusing on where did your head go and what's going on there. So just some final tips. On the next slide, look directly in the camera. It may seem weird because your camera may be at the top of your laptop, but the panel is lower than that. But if you're staring at the people, it looks like you're looking down and not looking at them. And eye contact is still important in a virtual interview. Take notes. I think that's a great way to make sure you can answer the question. And I suggest people do it on paper. Some people are typing during virtual interviews and you can hear people banging on the keyboard. And again, that's another distraction. Remember to smile. When you smile, it comes through in your voice. And so, you know, sometimes it may feel like you're tired of talking to a camera and a computer all day, but smiling at your computer will help project that passion and that charisma across virtually to your panel. Of course, be yourself, because you're also interviewing the company and you want to work somewhere that wants you, where you will feel included in the organization. Work to build a rapport like you would with an in-person interview. Come into the forum and have that conversation before they get started. You know, how is everyone? You know, it's great to meet you. You know, all of those things that you would do if you walked into an in-person interview. And just monitor your energy and enthusiasm. What I've seen is candidates sometimes struggle after these long, you know, virtual interviews. They're getting tired of staring at the camera. Their energy is kind of waning. Do what you need to do to keep your energy up, whether that's water, good sleep, take a walk beforehand, all those good things. Also be gracious if your panel's having tech issues. Don't get frustrated. Again, that's going to reflect in your resilience and your ability on how you're going to show up at work. If you're frustrated with them, if the company's having issues with their technology, you know, be gracious with them, and hopefully they'll be gracious with you as well. And just finally, remember that you got this. So that confidence can always come through in a virtual interview. So thank you so much. And I think we can have time for questions, I believe.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate the presentation. It definitely, it built my confidence. I was low-key looking at jobs while you were presenting, just because I haven't looked at jobs in a long, and there I found like 3 of like companies that I really want to work for. So it changed my whole week now. Anyways, I think Natrice had a question to start off if no one has anything at the moment.
Thanks, Fabian. Jennifer, a question for you. This is Natrice Bryant. When you talked about making sure that we're talking about things that we're doing on our resume and some actions, you talked about bullets that show successes in our jobs. What would you recommend as a recruiter that shows that you've done a lot, but not bragging too much? So we don't want to have like 10 bullets, but what's the appropriate number of successful things that we've done in an organization that you would look for?
That's a great question. You know, I think it may depend on how many jobs that you've had too. But I would say like 3 to 5 is a good number. And I would try to tailor and pull out accomplishments that mirror something you saw in the job announcement. So if the job announcement talked about they're looking for someone who can bolster sales or bring in new clients, do you have a metric that shows you did this somewhere else? So really honing in on the things that match what they're looking for.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Looks like we do have a question from Tara. She's asking, what is the protocol for adding people on virtual platforms such as LinkedIn? For those who are looking to build a network, what's the sort of etiquette for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I may be a bad person to ask because I am happy to connect with anyone, including all of you. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I love sharing jobs that I hear about in the county and other places. And the more people in my network, I feel like the more connection I have to potential job seekers. But I think when you are connecting to someone, making it personal and saying, hey, I was on this panel with the, CU Denver, and I just wanted to connect with you to hear about job opportunities, or so that, we can share resources or why you're connecting with them. And I think most people on LinkedIn, when they're there, they're open to having additional people in their network, as long as you have a professional opening and state kind of why you want to connect with the person.
Thank you. And then someone also asked, Cody asked, is in the context of a resume, how important is it to have an internship on your resume?
I think an internship can take the place of job experience. So I don't think you always have to have an internship if you also have job experience. But if you've been kind of really in school a lot and haven't had a lot of job experience outside of, going to school and being a student, an internship at least shows you've worked in a, kind of an environment with a team and had to collaborate and those kinds of things. So I think it can definitely be important. And if it's for the company you want to work in and try to find a job with, or in the same sector, it can be critical because that's your door into building that network and having someone who might be able to speak on your behalf around the work that you've done.
Thank you so much. So you're talking about standing out on a resume. What can you write on your cover letter to make yourself stand out?
Make it custom as much as possible, and talk about how you research the company and why you want to work for that organization. Talk about why you are interested in that particular job. It cannot be a blanket cover letter that you just use for every single job. That's one of those things that will end you in the bottom of the pile. So make sure you do that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I got a whole, just like I said earlier, I got a whole bout of inspiration now to, I already have like 3 jobs, so I don't think I should apply for another, but you made me want to. Thank you so much, Jennifer. It's great hearing from you today, and Cindy as well. It was wonderful to hear from 2 experts in their field. I hope that all of you, my fellow students, have gained benefited from this. And I encourage you to reach out to our speakers if you have any additional questions, or if you need more resources. But I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week, and thank you so much for joining us. And now I'm going to quickly go over some things that are coming up for those of you that are still on. We do have the virtual internship and job fair coming up next Thursday. I definitely encourage you all to go. It's a great networking opportunity. Now that we are all virtual, it's sometimes hard to find really good networking opportunities. So I very much encourage you to attend the job fair. And even if there aren't companies that you're interested in working with, you can always meet someone that might connect you with something else. So, definitely just put yourself out there. It's always good to be in an uncomfortable situation. Like I said, I'm the vice president of the Student Government Association. We really encourage you to get involved with us. We have Senate meetings every Friday. We put those on Facebook Live on our Facebook, so you can just chime in and ask any questions. You don't have to attend the whole thing. Just shoot us a question so we can discuss it. Or if you want to keep up with our whole discussion, it's a great time to know what we're working on and the different initiatives that we're trying to take on. One thing that is very relevant to our presentation today is an initiative that we started called Success Looks Like Me. It's going to be presentations by alumni that, well, at first we're going to do profiles and interviews of alumni, but in general, what we want to do is connect you with alumni that have similar experiences to you. and give you the confidence and you know, the sort of stories that you need to feel like ready to enter the workforce. And, you know, everyone had a different path to success. So it's kind of that idea of, you know, giving you as many tools as you can to understand your future and you know, inspire us to succeed. Please reach out if you guys have any questions, or if you know, want to get involved. My email is fabian.laguna@ucdenver.edu, or you can just email sga@ucdenver.edu. But the speakers' emails will be shared with all of you as well. So if you want to reach out to them, you can feel free to do so. But again, thank you so much for your time today and for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.
Just need tonight, but I could melt into